It was hotter than I expected for the first day of college. I lugged my suitcase down a path lined with way too many buildings. No signs, no maps, just me and my phone's dead battery. Great start. Lost, the voice startled me. I turned to see a girl with a wide smile, her hair bouncing as she moved. She wore a headband that said "Ask Me Anything," and I was this close to doing just that. Yeah, dorms, I pointed around, feeling like an idiot. She laughed. "You're in the wrong direction. Come on, I'll walk you." I followed her, trying to take in the campus. It was all a blur of students, moving boxes, and way too much noise. We made small talk about majors and dorm life, and before I knew it, we were standing in front of a brick building with dormitory and materia in big block letters. "This is it," she said, nodding. "You'll find your room inside. Good luck, freshman." I thanked her and headed in, my stomach tightening as I climbed the stairs. New people, new experiences, it all hit me at once. As I reached my room, the door was already cracked open. I pushed it lightly and froze. There was my new roommate, Charles, fresh out of the bathroom, wearing nothing but a towel. Hey, I stammered, my face flushing red. He glanced up, unfazed, and smiled. "You must be the new guy. Welcome." I nodded like an idiot, trying not to stare while my mind raced. This is how it starts, seriously? I barely managed to thanks before dumping my bags on the other bed. Charles, still dripping, shrugged like this was no big deal. "Name's Charles, by the way." I forced a smile. "Ronald." "Nice to meet you, Ronald." His grin was easygoing, and he didn't seem bothered by the awkwardness at all. "I'll get dressed. Don't worry." As he disappeared back into the bathroom, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Charles came back out, fully dressed this time. I tried to focus on unpacking, but the tension in the room was thick. Not the bad kind of tension, though. More like confusion? Curiosity? "So where are you from?" he asked, casually tossing his towel into a laundry basket. He sat on his bed, watching me as I fumbled with my clothes. New York," I mumbled, hanging up a shirt. "You?" "Texas law student. You?" "Engineering," I replied, barely looking up. My mind was still replaying the towel scene. "Figures," he chuckled, running a hand through his damp hair. "You've got that I like math vibe?" I rolled my eyes, but the tension cracked a little. "Yeah, well, I don't know about like, but I'm decent at it." Charles smiled and stood up, stretching lazily. "We'll get along fine then." "I'm terrible at math. Maybe you can help me cheat on exams." His tone was light, but there was a twinkle in his eye. I laughed. "Yeah, right, you're a law student. Aren't you supposed to know the rules?" He shrugged. "Rules are negotiable." I didn't know how to respond to that. There was something easy about him, something that put me off balance but made me curious. He seemed so comfortable in his own skin. Meanwhile, I was trying not to trip over my words. Just then, his phone buzzed on the nightstand and he glanced at it, frowning. "Shit, I've got to run. First day and I'm already late for some meet and greet thing. You good here?" "Yeah, I'm good." He grabbed a jacket, tossing it over his shoulder. "Cool, we'll grab dinner later, yeah? I'll show you the best places to eat around here." Sure." He shot me that grin again, and with a quick nod, he was out the door. I sat down on my bed, exhaling. The room felt different now that he was gone, quieter, smaller, and my mind was spinning. What just happened? I couldn't shake the feeling that Charles was going to be a lot more than just a roommate. Dinner with Charles wasn't what I expected. We hit the campus diner, and right away it felt like I'd known him for years. No awkward pauses, no forced small talk, just easy conversation. He made everything feel simple. "So, engineering," Charles asked, biting into a burger. "You planning to build bridges or something?" "Something like that," I said, laughing. "I'm just trying to survive the first semester without flunking out." He smirked. "You'll be fine. Worst case, we cheat off each other. You help me with math. I'll teach you how to talk your way out of anything." I shook my head, grinning. "I don't think professors negotiate grades." You'd be surprised, he winked, then nodded toward my plate. "Finish your fries, man. No one trusts a guy who wastes fries." It was effortless, hanging out with him. We kept the banter going all through dinner, and by the time we walked back to the dorm, I realized I hadn't been this comfortable with anyone in a long time. A few days turned into weeks, and suddenly Charles and I were inseparable. We studied together, hit the gym, grabbed food between classes. It felt natural. Our conversations were never dull. And he had this way of making even the most boring stuff interesting. Like when we were cramming for a midterm, and he'd go off on tangents about how laws were just social math. I wasn't sure if he was full of it or if he actually believed that, but it made studying bearable. We didn't just stick to school stuff either. We started going out on weekends, exploring the city around campus. I'd never been a big drinker, but Charles loved dragging me to these dingy little bars, claiming they had character. "You gotta live a little," Ronald, he'd say, handing me some questionable cocktail. "You're in college now. Time to stop being such a square." I'd roll my eyes but take the drink anyway. I wasn't about to admit he was right about loosening up, at least. But yeah, being around him was starting to change me, even if I didn't want to admit it. One night, after a particularly rough study session, we crashed in the dorm, both exhausted. I was half asleep when Charles, lying on his bed across the room, asked out of nowhere, "You ever think about how weird this is?" I blinked, still groggy. "What?" College. No, he said, his voice lower now. Us being thrown together like this. It's just weird, right? We didn't even know each other a few weeks ago. I didn't know what to say. Yeah, it was weird, but it was also the best thing that had happened to me since arriving. Yeah, I finally muttered. It's weird, but in a good way. He chuckled softly in the dark. Good, I was worried I was the only one who thought that. I didn't answer, and eventually the silence swallowed us dry the room again, but the air felt different. There was something unspoken hanging between us, and for the first time I wasn't sure if it was just friendship anymore. It wasn't any one moment that did it. More like a slow, creeping feeling that I couldn't shake. We were grabbing dinner again, nothing fancy, just another night of burgers and fries. Charles was going off on one of his usual rants about the latest law class, waving a fry like it was a lecture pointer. I laughed at all the right parts, but inside something felt different. He'd been talking for 10 minutes before he paused and smirked. You good? You're awfully quiet. Yeah, I'm fine, I said a little too quickly. I shoved a fry in my mouth, trying to distract myself. What the hell is wrong with me? But it wasn't just tonight. It had been building for weeks. The way I noticed him more. How his laugh seemed to linger in the air, just a little too long. I caught myself watching him, how his hair flopped over his forehead, how his smile came so easily. It was starting to mess with my head. Ronald, his voice cut through my thoughts. You're zoning out again? I blinked, realizing I'd been staring. Sorry, just thinking. Charles grinned, leaning back in his chair. Dangerous thing, thinking. You should leave that to me. I forced a laugh, but my stomach twisted. I needed to get a grip. This was Charles, my roommate, my best friend. That's it, right? Later that night, back in our dorm, we were both sprawled on our beds, dead tired after another long day. The TV flickered in the background, but neither of us was really watching it. Out of nowhere, Charles threw a crumpled paper ball at me. Hey, you've been weird all night. Spill. I sat up, pretending to be annoyed. I'm fine, dude. You're not. Simon, what's going on? His voice was softer now, more serious. I swallowed hard, trying to find an excuse, any excuse, but instead I just blurted out. I don't know, man. I've just been thinking a lot. Charles raised an eyebrow. About you. I couldn't say that, obviously. I scrambled for something else. Just college stuff. I guess I'm still getting used to everything. He didn't seem convinced, but he let it slide. All right, but you know you can talk to me, right? Yeah, I know. My voice sounded hollow, even to me. We both settled back into the silence, but the air felt heavy, like something unsaid was hanging between us. I couldn't stop glancing over at him, watching the way the light from the TV played over his face. The relaxed way he leaned back, completely at ease. God, why is this happening? I shouldn't be feeling this way. But the more I tried to push it down, the stronger it got. Suddenly, Charles turned toward me, catching me off guard. You're staring again, Ronald. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. He held my gaze for a second longer than usual, then just grinned, shaking his head. You're a strange one, he said lightly, turning back to the TV. I lay there, heart pounding, wondering if maybe, just maybe, he had noticed what was really going on. It happened late one night. One of those nights where the world feels still, like it's holding its breath. Charles and I were in the dorm, half watching some mindless movie, neither of us really paying attention. He was on his bed, sprawled out like he owned the place, while I sat at my desk, pretending to work on some homework that I wasn't actually doing. You look like you're about to pass out, Charles said, his voice low and lazy. Come over here. Stop pretending to work. I shot him a look. I'm trying to be productive. Yeah, sure, he laughed, patting the spot next to him. Come on, you've been at it for hours. Take a break. I hesitated, my heart beating a little faster. This wasn't unusual. We'd sat next to each other 100 times before, but tonight, it felt different. Everything felt different lately. Still, I got up and moved to the bed, lying down next to him. The warmth of his body was close enough to feel, but not touching. It was comfortable and dangerous. We didn't talk for a while, just watched the screen, the soft glow from the TV flickering across the room. My mind kept racing, though. I was hyper-aware of every small movement he made, the quiet sound of his breathing, the way his arm rested just inches from mine. Then, out of nowhere, he shifted. His arm brushed against mine, and instead of pulling away, he left it there. I tensed, every nerve on edge. What the hell is happening right now? You're quiet again, Charles murmured. He didn't move his arm. I swallowed, trying to act normal. Just tired. His voice dropped, soft and low. You've been acting weird for a while now. You sure it's just being tired? I turned to look at him, and suddenly he was closer than I realized. His eyes, those dark, intense eyes, were locked on mine. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't normal. I'm fine, I whispered, but even I didn't believe it. For a second, neither of us moved. The air between us felt like it was charged with something I couldn't explain. Then, before I could even think about it, Charles leaned in. His lips brushed mine, just barely, like he was testing the waters. And I didn't pull away. Instead, I kissed him back, my heart racing like I was jumping off a cliff. It wasn't slow or tentative anymore. It was like everything we'd been holding back came rushing to the surface at once, and suddenly I couldn't stop. His hands were on me, pulling me closer, and all the tension that had been building for weeks finally broke loose. The room disappeared. It was just him and me, tangled in each other, the weight of the moment pressing down like nothing else mattered. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like a blur, like time had collapsed in on itself. All I knew was that when we finally pulled apart, everything was different. The movie was still playing, but the silence between us was louder than anything. Charles was the first to speak, his voice rough. Well, that happened. I laughed, but it sounded shaky, even to me. Yeah, it did. He looked at me, something unreadable in his expression. You okay? Yeah, I said, though my mind was spinning. Was I okay? I had no idea. Charles gave me that familiar grin, but this time it felt different. Let's not overthink it tonight. Okay. We didn't talk much after that. We just lay there, side by side, pretending to watch the movie again. But I knew we'd crossed a line. There was no going back now. The next morning, everything seemed normal. Too normal considering what had happened the night before. Charles acted like it was just another day. He was back to his usual routine, showering, throwing on clothes, and cracking jokes about some assignment he had barely touched. Dude, I'm gonna need you to help me with this econ class. I have no idea what the hell is going on, he said, tossing a notebook onto my bed like nothing had changed. I nodded, but my mind was somewhere else. Last night hadn't just been some random thing for me. It felt huge, but Charles, he seemed fine, like he could brush it off, and maybe I should too. I tried to play it cool, pretend that I wasn't overthinking everything. We grabbed breakfast, joked around like usual, and went our separate ways to class. By the time I got back to the dorm later that afternoon, I convinced myself it was better not to push things. Maybe we could keep it simple. Just let whatever happened happen. But that's not how life works. Especially not in college. I was in my room scrolling through my phone when a knock rattled the door. Before I could even get up, the door swung open and a couple of guys from down the hall barged in, laughing way too loud. Yo, Ronald, one of them called, way too excited. What's good, man? I frowned, confused. Not much. They exchanged glances, smirking like they had a secret I didn't. You haven't seen it yet, have you? Seen what my stomach twisted. One of them tossed his phone onto my bed. This. I picked it up, heart pounding. On the screen was a video of last night, of Charles and me, tangled together in that kiss, clear as day. My blood went cold as I realized what this meant. Someone had recorded it. What the hell? I barely managed to breathe the words out. Oh yeah, someone posted it this morning. It's blowing up. Half the campus has seen it by now, one of the guys said, laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. And guess we know now why you two are so close. They thought it was a joke. They had no idea how much everything had just imploded for me. Get out, I said, my voice shaking. The guy blinked. What? I said, get the hell out. I threw the phone back at him, and they backed out of the room, still laughing like it was no big deal. But for me, it felt like the walls were closing in. Charles walked in not long after. I didn't even look at him. My mind was still spinning, trying to piece together how this had happened. Who had filmed us? Why? And more importantly, what the hell was I supposed to do now? Ronald Charles' voice was cautious. I shoved my phone toward him. Have you seen this? He picked it up, watched for a few seconds, then cursed under his breath. What the how did this? I don't know, I said, barely able to hold back my frustration. But now the whole college knows. Everyone knows. Charles stared at the screen for a moment longer, then threw the phone onto his bed. Look, we can handle this. It's not the end of the world. I shot him a look. Not the end of the world. Charles, everyone knows. People are laughing at us. Who cares what they think? He shot back, his voice firm. I felt my chest tighten. I care. You can brush this off, but I can't. I don't even know how to deal with this. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. We'll figure it out, okay? But let's not freak out yet. But I was already freaking out. My mind was buzzing with every possible scenario, how people would treat me, how it would change everything between us. And the worst part, there was no going back now. The next few days were a blur. Everywhere I went, people stared, whispered, and laughed. The video spread like wildfire. It was like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. The campus, which had once felt big and anonymous, now felt suffocating. I'd try to walk to class, and it was like I could feel eyes on me from every corner. Every whisper sounded like it was aimed at me, even if it wasn't. I'd hear snickering as I passed, someone muttering, "That's the guy from the video." Charles, on the other hand, acted like nothing had changed. He still walked around like he owned the place, cracking jokes and shrugging off the whole thing. It pissed me off. How could he be so calm when my world was crumbling? One afternoon, after another day of awkward stares and feeling like I had a target on my back, I stormed back to the dorm. Charles was already there, lounging on his bed, looking at his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. I threw my bag on the floor. How can you be so chill about this? He glanced up, raising an eyebrow. I pointed around, frustration bubbling over. This, the video, the stares, the whispers. Everyone's talking about us and you act like it's nothing. Charles sighed, sitting up. Ronald, people are gonna talk. That's what they do. You can't let it get to you. That's easy for you to say, I snapped. But you don't care what anyone thinks. But I'm not like you, Charles. This is my life too. He stood, his expression shifting from calm to annoyed. What do you want me to do? Lose my mind over it? That's not gonna change anything. I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. So it's not just about the video. It's about us. You act like none of this even matters. Charles stepped closer, his jaw tight. Of course it matters. But losing our shit over it isn't going to fix anything. We just need to ride it out. Ride it out, I repeated, incredulous. Is that your solution? Just ignore it and hope it goes away. Yeah, pretty much, he said, crossing his arms. People have short memories. This will blow over. I stared at him, feeling the gap between us widen. Charles wasn't taking this seriously and it hurt. To him, this was just a blip, something that would pass. But to me, it felt like everything had changed. The silence between us stretched, tense and heavy. I can't do this, I muttered, turning away. Charles' voice softened. Ronald. No, seriously, I can't just pretend like nothing's wrong. I'm not built that way. For the first time since the video had surfaced, Charles looked uncertain. He stepped closer, but I backed away, keeping my distance. Maybe we need some space, I said quietly, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. His eyes flickered with something surprised, maybe hurt. Space. Yeah, I need to figure out what I want. It's too much right now. Charles didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at me like he was trying to figure out if I was serious. Fine, he finally muttered, his tone colder than I'd ever heard. Do what you need to do. He grabbed his jacket and walked out the door without another word, leaving me alone in the quiet, empty dorm. The silence felt unbearable after he left, but I couldn't shake the knot in my chest. I hated that it had come to this, us drifting apart, the tension building until it snapped. But I also knew I couldn't keep going like everything was fine. I needed to breathe, to clear my head and figure out what I wanted. The video wasn't just a scandal. It was a trigger that forced me to confront feelings I hadn't been ready to deal with. And now, Charles and I were both caught in the fallout. The space I thought I needed only made things worse. Days stretched on, and I barely saw Charles. He crashed at someone else's place most nights. And when he did come back to the dorm, we barely exchanged a word. The silence between us was suffocating, the awkwardness palpable. It was like living with a stranger. I hated it, but I didn't know how to fix it. Every time I thought about reaching out, my pride stopped me. I was angry that he didn't seem to care, angry that we were caught in this mess, and most of all, angry at myself for pushing him away. But it was too late to go back now. I'd set this in motion and it felt like the only direction left was down. It all boiled over one night. I was sitting in the dorm alone, staring at my phone, scrolling through messages and posts I should have ignored. People were still talking, still laughing about the video, and I could feel my anger building. It was like a weight pressing on my chest, and I couldn't breathe. Then the door slammed open and Charles walked in. He looked pissed. Really pissed. Where the hell have you been? I asked, surprised by the anger in my voice. I didn't mean for it to come out like that, but it did. Charles slammed his bag onto his bed, not looking at me. Out. Out? That's it? You've barely been here in days? What do you care? His voice was sharp, colder than I'd ever heard it. You're the one who wanted space, remember? I stood up, my own frustration bubbling over. I didn't want this. You just what? Ronald, he spun to face me, his eyes blazing with anger. You don't get to play the victim here? You're the one who pushed me away, so don't act like this is all on me. His words hit harder than I expected. He wasn't wrong, but it still stung. I didn't know what else to do, okay? I couldn't handle all of this. And you acted like you didn't even care. Of course I care, Charles shouted, stepping closer. But you didn't give me a chance, you just shut down and pushed me out. What the hell was I supposed to do? Beg you to let me stay. I didn't have an answer. We stood there, breathing hard, glaring at each other. The tension in the room felt like it could snap any second. You think I wanted this, Charles continued, his voice quieter now but just as intense. You think I wanted to be the center of some scandal, to have everyone talking about me like I'm some joke? I didn't ask for any of this either, Ronald. I swallowed hard, my chest tight. Then why didn't you say anything? You just acted like it was no big deal, like none of it mattered. Because I didn't want to lose you, his voice cracked. And for the first time, I saw something raw in his eyes. I didn't want to scare you off, so I tried to play it cool. But guess what? It didn't work, did it? I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. Charles. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. I didn't know what else to do. I was trying to keep things normal because I didn't want you to freak out. I didn't want to make things worse. Well, congratulations, I muttered. It's a disaster. Silence fell between us, both of us breathing heavily, anger and frustration mingling with something deeper, something neither of us had said out loud yet. Finally, Charles spoke, his voice softer now. Ronald, I'm not going to keep chasing you. If you want space, fine. But don't expect me to wait around forever. His words hit me hard. I knew this was the breaking point. It was now or never. I don't want space, I said quietly, finally admitting it. I don't know how to do this. All of this. I'm not like you. I'm not good at pretending everything's fine when it's not. Charles looked at me, his expression softening. I'm not pretending, Ronald. I care about you a lot more than I probably should, and that's why I didn't want to screw things up. Hearing him say that made my chest tighten. I took a shaky breath, my heart racing. I don't want to lose you either. We stood there for what felt like forever, the weight of the moment hanging between us. Finally, Charles took a step closer, his voice low, then stopped pushing me away. I swallowed hard, feeling the pull between us again. I'm sorry, I freaked out. I get it, he said softly, closing the distance between us. But let's stop running in circles, okay? We're in this together, whether we like it or not. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. I nodded, and without another word, he pulled me into a tight hug. We stood there, holding on to each other like we were both afraid to let go. After that night, things changed, but not in the way I expected. The tension between us broke, and there was this quiet understanding now. Charles didn't leave the dorm to crash somewhere else anymore. He was back, and somehow it felt like we were closer, even though we didn't talk about what happened. We didn't need to. It was small things at first. I'd wake up to find Charles already up, making coffee, setting out an extra mug for me. We'd sit there, sharing the silence like it was a language only we spoke. No awkwardness, no need for forced conversation, just ease. Classes were still a mess, though. The whispers and stares hadn't stopped. People still watched us like we were some kind of sideshow, but this time it didn't eat at me the way it had before. Maybe it was because Charles and I had stopped running from it. Maybe because we had each other's backs now, even when we didn't say it out loud. One afternoon, a couple of guys from my engineering class started whispering behind me again, laughing under their breath. I could feel the heat rising in my neck, my fists clenching. But then, just as I was about to snap, Charles appeared at my side, casual as ever. Hey, you good, he asked, his voice low but steady. I glanced at the guys, who immediately shut up, then looked back at Charles. His calm, his presence had anchored me. I took a breath, nodded. Yeah, I'm good. Let's go grab lunch, he said, throwing an arm over my shoulder like nothing was wrong. I'm starving. And just like that, the tension fizzled out. With Charles there, it was easier to ignore the noise to focus on what actually mattered. Later that week, we were sitting on the quad, Charles lying back in the grass, his eyes closed, soaking in the sun. I was sitting next to him, fiddling with my phone, pretending to study for a test I hadn't started yet. And you ever think about the future, I asked, out of nowhere. It was something I hadn't even realized I was thinking about until the words left my mouth. Charles cracked an eye open, glancing at me. The future? You mean like tomorrow or 5 years from now? Both, I guess I shrugged, feeling stupid for even bringing it up. He sat up, rubbing the back of his neck, thinking, yeah, I think about it. What about you? I hesitated. I wasn't sure how honest I should be, but after everything that had happened, I figured there was no point in holding back anymore. I don't know. It's weird. I came to college thinking I had everything figured out, and now I feel like I don't know anything. Charles nodded, leaning back on his elbows. You're not alone. I don't have a clue either. People act like they've got it all planned out, but they're just as lost as we are. I glanced at him, realizing he wasn't joking this time. You really don't know? He smiled, but it was softer than usual. Nope, but I do know one thing. Whatever happens next, I'm not going to worry about it too much. Life's too short for that. We sat there for a while longer, the breeze warm and soft. It was the first time in weeks that I felt, okay, like the chaos had finally settled, and maybe things didn't need to be figured out all at once. Then, Charles spoke again, his voice quieter this time. You know, whatever happens with us, I'm not going anywhere. I looked over at him, my chest tightening, but in a good way. Yeah, he said, meeting my gaze. We'll figure it out. For the first time in a long time, I believed him. The uncertainty, the whispers, the video, it was still there, still part of us. But it didn't define us anymore. We'd gotten through the worst of it, and now we were stronger for it. A few weeks later, the video had mostly faded into the background. It wasn't forgotten, but college life moves fast. People found new gossip, new scandals, and slowly we were no longer the center of attention. That's how it works, people move on. And so did we. Charles and I had fallen into a rhythm again, but it was different now. Better, maybe. There were no more unspoken words, no more pretending things didn't matter. It was like everything had settled, and we were finally on solid ground. One night, we were in the dorm, Charles tossing a tennis ball against the wall while I pretended to study. The faint sound of music leaked through the walls from a party down the hall, but we didn't care. It was just us. Us. Hey, you ever gonna stop pretending to study? Charles asked, glancing over at me with a smirk. I rolled my eyes. I'm trying to get something done. He laughed, the sound easy and familiar. You're not fooling anyone. Come on, let's take a break. I sighed, closing my textbook. Fine, what's the plan? No plan. Just he tossed the tennis ball aside and leaned back against the wall, his eyes on me. Let's talk. I raised an eyebrow. Talk? About what? About us, his tone was casual, but I could feel the weight behind his words. I swallowed, my throat tight. What about us? Charles shrugged, his eyes steady on mine. Just where we're going with all this. Where we stand. I felt my stomach tighten, but in a different way than before. This wasn't fear, wasn't uncertainty. It was the realization that we were finally having the conversation we'd been avoiding since that first kiss. I don't know, I admitted, my voice quieter now. I'm still figuring it out. Charles nodded, like he expected that answer. Same, but I know one thing. What's that? He pushed himself off the wall and came closer, sitting on the edge of my bed. I'm not looking for something casual. I didn't go through all that crap with the video and the rumors just for a fling. I met his gaze, my heart pounding. Neither am I. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could say it, like I could finally admit that whatever was happening between us was real, messy and confusing, but real. I wasn't running from it anymore. I don't know what this is, I continued, but I want to figure it out with you. Charles smiled, that easy grin of his, but this time there was something more behind it, something serious, good because I'm not going anywhere. He leaned in, and before I knew it, his lips were on mine. This time it wasn't rushed or uncertain. It was steady, sure, like we'd both finally accepted where we were headed. When we pulled apart, Charles rested his forehead against mine. You know, it's still going to be tough. People are always going to talk. I know, I said, my voice steady now, but I don't care anymore. He chuckled, sitting back. That's the spirit. The days went on and we slipped back into our routine classes, hanging out, studying late into the night. The only difference was that now when I reached for him, I didn't hesitate. He was there and so was I. It wasn't perfect. We still had awkward moments, still bumped up against each other's walls from time to time, but we were figuring it out together. One evening, as we sat outside on campus, the sun setting behind us, Charles turned to me, his expression serious. So, what's next, he asked, his voice softer now. I smiled, leaning back on my hands. We finished the semester, take it one day at a time. I don't have all the answers, but I'm okay with that. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, mine too. For the first time in a long time, I felt a calm settle over me. It wasn't the kind of calm that comes from knowing everything will be perfect. It was the kind that comes from knowing you'll figure it out, no matter what. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching as the last bit of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, and I knew whatever came next, we were ready for it.